name is Richard Tindall. I was in ETR2. What led me into the Navy was, it was at the point where people were getting drafted. My father had been in the Navy toward the end of World War II. The Navy seemed like a good place to be. 3 square meals a day, and you didn't have to spend your nights in a foxhole. All seemed like a pretty good deal. When we talked to the recruiter, he liked that I had been in college, said that if I was willing to sign for an extra 2 years, they would train me in electronics, which in fact is what happened. So I went to boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois. It was interesting. I'm pretty much more of a forward-looking person than a backward-looking person. So it was an adventure, and so I tend to see things as opportunities, and how could I survive, flourish in my new environment. One thing that happened in boot camp was you get these inoculations. So they have basically a little pneumatic gun that fires like 16 different shots into your arm. And I'm standing behind this guy who I could best describe as an iron pumper. Okay? So anyway, I'm standing in line behind him, and the guy, as you come up to the guy with the gun, says, just relax. So you relax, he puts it up, pulls the trigger, next. So the guy in front of me, he goes, okay, just relax. And just as he goes to pull the trigger, the guy flexes. Bled like a stuck pig. Just blood all over the place. And so they kind of took him out of line. I relaxed as much as I could, got my shot, moved along. They cut off all your hair, which didn't bother me at all. I'd always had brush cuts, so that was no big thing. It's funny because at the time I just thought it made sense what they were doing. And I'm kind of a history nut about World War II and the Civil War and just wars in general. And one of the things that I relate the training we got to in World War II that made a huge difference in World War II, nobody talks about it, is the fact that the Japanese built their aircraft carriers to be fast, to have as many planes and bombs and whatever on board as they could. They were a little short on firefighting equipment, and they were very short on redundancies. Okay, now that sounds like a strange word to use, but in the United States Navy, if you need a pump and it's a really critical pump, more than likely they'll have 2. On a destroyer, you need propeller, obviously. More often than not, there's 2. And that way, if one gets disabled, the other one will still move the ship. If one pump goes out, there's still another one. If a generator goes out, there's another one, so on and so forth. So when the Battle of Midway, Yorktown gets hit, fires, hole in the deck, ship's dead in the water. Hour and a half later, the ship's steaming at like 18 knots. There's no more hole in the deck. Fires are all out. Japanese come back and think, oh, there's another aircraft carrier, and they hit it again. They never did find the other 2 aircraft carriers. And that was one of the reasons why. The Japanese, we hit 3 aircraft carriers with a total of 4 bombs. 2 of them, only 1, and 1 got hit with 2 bombs, and they all ended up going down. And that's because, well, 2 things really. They had munitions all over the deck, so that when the fire started, they started blowing up their own ammunition. But as soon as something got disabled, that was it. There was no backup. There was no, there's no more fire water. There's no more, you can't put out the fires. And they simply burned, exploded, and sunk. It was a huge difference in that battle. And like I say, when I was in boot camp, being trained for things that, I hoped would never happen, it never dawned on me that the difference between us and them way back then was the training, was the equipment, was all of that. The thing I remember about it the most was they put you in a room and you had like a face mask on, and then you had to take off the face mask and they put tear gas in. And you were only in it for a few seconds. And then you get out and you're coughing and, it was very uncomfortable. And yet, it helped prepare you for what that was going to be like. And so, if you were on board ship and you were in a smoky area or, whatever, it wasn't like that. It never happened before. They made you go in the water to see if you actually would just sink to the bottom or if you could figure out what to do to save yourself in the water. Simple things like that, and yet pretty important if you're out to sea and something happens. Interesting, the interpersonal relationships. Like I say, what happened in the dormitory was there was a guy that I had been pretty good friends with, was in my squad, short guy, and this other guy from another squad was picking on him. And it was pretty clear he was about to pick a fight with him. And so I piped up. I'm sitting on a bunk, an upper bunk, and I go, "Hey," I won't say exactly how I described him, but something that would get his attention. If you want to fight somebody, why don't you fight me? I'm free. And he's like, hey, shut up. And I'm like, well, I don't need to. And since you seem a little frisky, maybe you're not man enough to fight somebody my size. And he's like, oh, you. So I jump down. I'm standing there. He goes and takes a swing at me, missed, and I start laughing at him. And he goes nuts. And other guys jump in and they pull us apart. The first class comes in and he's like, what's going on here? And everybody said, nothing, we're just talking. And then afterwards was the thing where I got assigned as the recruit chief master of arms. Because they were, like I say, the squad leader had gotten like a medical thing and they thought he was going to be gone. But it turned out he came back in a couple of days. In the interim, they had made me the second squad leader. So now they got 2 second squad leaders. They don't need to, and they thought it was best that they got me out of the company anyway. They looked at my service record, thought I could handle what they wanted me to do. They seemed pretty happy with the way that worked out. Well, essentially every morning when they went to chow. I went to chow with them, and when I got done eating, instead of going back to the barracks, I went to the 2nd Regiment, the headquarters, and there was a chief in there, big old, I don't know that I ever saw him get out of his chair, chief, and he said, here's what you do, and here's how you do it, and pretty much from the first day I was there, I did all the assigning of all the working parties. They offered me a job as the recruit chief master at arms for the base, for the recruit base. So for the rest of recruit training, I didn't have to spend with my company. I slept with them, but I did not go to anything but must classes. The rest of the time I basically did a job, which was to assign working parties. If, for instance, if you went to swimming classes and there were 8 guys that for one reason or another couldn't go to the class, they would send them to me and I would assign them to a working party. For instance, the base E-Dunk would get 15 people a day. The storage facility would get 30 people a day, so on and so forth. So I was the assigner for all of those things through boot camp. And it was only really about a half-day job, but I was there for the full day. If I had things to read or, you know, stuff to catch up on, I could do that. I could write letters, pretty much what I wanted to do. I didn't have to march anywhere. I didn't have to do most of the stuff that they did, except, like I say, must classes. So, like firefighting or, you know, something like that. After boot camp, BE&E school, which basic electricity and electronics. It was a night school because this was kind of the height of the Vietnam War. There were a lot of people going in. They needed more bodies, and so they only had facilities for half the number of people they wanted to put through the school. So they created day school and night school. So I ended up in night school. So during the day, this was at Great Lakes, Illinois, and it turns out that there's if you walk out of the base, there was like railroad track out in front, and then on the other side of that, there was a Burger King. So 3 or 4 of us would walk out every morning about 10:30, as soon as the Burger King was open, and we would sit there and have what to us was sort of breakfast, but it actually was lunch. And we would do our homework from B&E school. And so that was the basics of electricity and electronics, the kind of building blocks that you needed to go to the electronics school. So after BE&E, I went to a different part of the base for radar A school. And there you learned about radar. There's a big transmitter, sends out a signal, the signal goes out, bounces off of something, a plane, a ship, land, something that would reflect that electricity, and then there's a receiver. And the receiver gets pumped into a circular display, which we called repeaters. And the display on the repeater would tell a technician, a radarman, where things were, where the land was, where the other ships were, where planes were coming in. The surface search radar basically was more designed for ships and land. There was also, on destroyers, there was also an air search radar, which did not so much define the land masses. I mean, they'd be there, but you were looking for things at a much further range. Would be effective up to 300 miles. So the SPS-10 was the surface search radar. The SPS-30 or other ones later on was the air search radar. A bigger antenna, actually higher on the ship. My grades were good enough in radar A school that they wanted me to go to Portsmouth, Virginia for crypto. And so I went there for another 6 months and was assigned crypto NEC, which at the time didn't seem all that important to me. It actually turned out to be kind of pivotal later on. The cryptographic equipment, there were 2 different kinds that we trained on. One was a voice scrambler, so that you could have a secure voice communication between 2 ships. And essentially what crypto is there's a box, and if it's voice, you speak into a receiver, and it would transmit through this box to a transmitter, and then would go to out of the air gobbledygook. And there'd be another one of those little boxes on the other ship that would take the gobbledygook and turn it into voice. Same thing with teletype. Basically all the communications, all the written communications were teletype. So same thing, it would go into the box, gobbledygook, go. Essentially what they would teach you the basics of how the magic boxes worked. And I'll never forget toward the end of the one for the teletype, which was a TW37. And the guy would go, okay, so you're out to sea and something goes wrong. He said, whatever you do, don't try to fix it. He said, if you get in there and start trying to take your tools and whatever, you're just going to make it worse. So don't do that. He said, out to sea, here's what you do. You walk in there, you make sure that the radio man can't see what you're doing, because typically there's a separate room for the transmitters and the crypto and everything. So you go in there, you close that door, you unscrew the box, you pull it out, and it's basically just 2 rows of cards, electronic cards, okay? And all the computer stuff is on those cards. He said, so you unscrew it, you pull it out, and you bang on all those cards. Just bang on all the cards, push it back in, tighten it all up, light it off. He says, if it doesn't work the first time, try it a second time. Essentially what happens is that when you're at sea, it's a warm, moist environment, and the contacts will oxidize. And when they get to a point where they won't transmit across the oxidation, the thing won't work properly. So what you're doing is you're jiggling the cards enough to wipe away the oxidation, and it creates a good contact. I had to do that several times on different cruises. I only had to do it twice once. Never let the radio man know what we were doing, and it always worked. So it was excellent instruction, and it worked out just fine underway. Out of sea school, I got sent to Boston, Massachusetts, to a reserve can, USS Compton, 705. I'm always struck by, I enjoy the movie Honey for Red October, because early in the movie they go and he meets this guy who's looking at a submarine in a dry dock. And every time I see that scene on the movie, I'm struck by the first time I saw the Compton, because the Compton was in a dry dock. And you go down, and here's the ship above you, and it's impressive. She was in dry dock when I first saw her. We went aboard a couple of times. She was out of dry dock pretty soon after I came aboard, and then we were over in South Boston Naval Annex, and it was kind of like boot camp in a sense, you know, barracks life. I'd been in the Scouts way back when, Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, so I was used to being in a barracks-like situation with a lot of other people my own age, males. At the time they were all males. And so it wasn't a big culture shock or anything like that. It was just a matter of, you know, where's my workspace? What am I allowed to do there? How do I get from there to the berthing part to where we, you know, the maneuvering? On board ship, I learned early on that a ship is built on frames. If you look at the skeleton of a ship, there's frames all the way down, and then the skin of the ship is laid over the frames. So on board ship, there are all these little name tags on the wall, and that on that tag it tells you what level you're on. So the main deck is 1. If you're above the main deck, it's 01, and then above that is 02, 03. If you go down from 1, it's 2 or 3, and then dash, and then the frame number, starting at number 1, which is the pointy end of the ship, and all the way back to whatever the last frame is, 100 and whatever, back at the other end of the ship. So you know essentially where you are on the ship, up and down and front to back, by simply looking over at one of these tags on the wall all over the place and say, oh, I'm right there. So I learned that early on. It helped me an awful lot with being able to navigate on that ship, and then when I got on other ships, when I was aboard the Enterprise, I could get a pretty good idea where I was, because on the Enterprise it was pretty easy to get lost. Like I say, it's like being in a city after you've been in a small town your whole life. I served about 9 months on the Compton. We actually went for refresher training. They were actually installing the sonar dome when I got there. As soon as that was done, we went to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for refresher training. And then back, we spent 2 days in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which was kind of neat. My role on the Compton was pretty simple. We didn't do much, so there wasn't much to do. We did go out every once in a while. We went to, like I say, we went to Guantanamo Bay, and more often than not, a lot of what we ended up doing was just trying to teach other people how to use the equipment. Because the typical thing that would happen, funny, I was talking to a radarman last night, and I said, yeah, so I'm asleep, we're underway, I'm asleep in my rack, it's a little after midnight, you know, quarter after 12, I'm fast asleep. So they come down and they kind of, you know, knock your rack, and basically they don't get too close, because if somebody like swings at you, you know, they're asleep, they don't know. So you kind of, and so they wake me up, and you know, the bridge radar repeater's not working. I'm like, oh jeez, now again. So I get up, I get some clothes on, I gotta go, you know, because you're gonna have to answer to the duty officer, so you've got to be in, you know, full uniform. So anyway, so you put your uniform on, you go up, and you walk over, and the duty officer, JO, you know, a junior officer, and he's like, so that repeater's not working. And I walk over and I look at it, and I go, okay, and I turn up the gain. So what happens is, on the bridge at night, underway, you don't want any bright lights. So they turn everything down so you can just barely see stuff. And then when that watch changes at midnight, the new watch comes on, and if they're not experienced people, they don't know. All they can see is a blank screen, and they're like, oh, this isn't working. So I walk over and I go like this. Oh, there it is. And you know, now the guy is kind of sheepish, and I go, is there anything else? No, and that'll, you know, and then I kind of show whoever is there, okay, this one does this, and this one does that, and, you know, give them a little lesson. And then if it was close enough to midnight, I can actually go down to the mess decks and grab some mid-rats, because there's typically 3 meals a day, but if you're on a late watch, at midnight they actually put out what they call mid-rats. So I go down and grab a sandwich or something, and you know, kind of pay myself off for having to get up in the middle of the night for nothing. So it was kind of mixed bag, you know, neat. The radiomen were a little different in that they were in the communication equipment, so either voice or more often than not, they were involved with the teletype. And typically with teletype, it was either it was working or it wasn't. And if it wasn't, I already kind of went through what. You know, we were. I used to talk about electronics to them as the great god Uba, god of the trons, and you know, just to kind of mock the whole thing. You know, it was like, mysterious stuff. Well, to somebody who doesn't understand electronics, it is kind of mysterious. After I'd been there for about 6 months, they assigned a junior officer as the new electronic maintenance officer, the EMO. He was a Harvard graduate. His previous duty had been riverboats in Vietnam. Riverboats in Vietnam, everything was life and death. Reserve camp on the East Coast, pretty much everything was make-believe. So he and I didn't necessarily see things the same way. We got into a couple of differences of opinion. I found that there was a gentleman on the Lloyd Thomas, which was out of Newport, Rhode Island at the time. He did not want to go to Vietnam. He found out that the Lloyd Thomas was going to switch home ports to Pearl Harbor. And his choices were go to Canada or work a swap with somebody. So I swapped with him. So I went aboard the Lloyd Thomas, and at that point I was what they considered an experienced ET. I did some radar work, mostly maintenance. I was involved with both the air search and the surface search radar. And like I say, just basically more maintenance than anything else. So I ended up on the Lloyd Thomas. I spent probably a month and a half, 2 months in Rhode Island, and then we switched home ports to Honolulu via the Panama Canal. It's kind of funny. I was awake when we went into the canal, so I saw us approaching, kind of narrow, and then it was bedtime, so I slept, and the next morning I woke up and we were tied up in whatever little town is on the other end of the canal. So as far as actually going through the canal, I slept through most of it. Like I say, I saw us going into it, and the first lock, and then that was that. We went to San Diego. I actually went. I was the group that I was with. There were about 4 of us, and I was the oldest one. I was the only one that had a credit card, so I was the only one that could rent a car. So I was the one who rented the car. We went up to La Jolla. And in La Jolla, I was introduced to wine coolers and pitchers. And I'm not sure how much they want to know about that, but it was, the results were predictable. And we survived. And after 3 days in San Diego, I actually made back some of the money I spent in La Jolla by taking other people's duties so that they could go do what I did the first night, and then we pulled out and went to Pearl Harbor. Kind of like a long plane ride, it just, we were at sea, we weren't doing much of anything other than going. For the most part, the ETs were involved with maintenance, but there was a lot of free time. I had a tendency to go up to the quartermaster shack, which was actually over the main bridge. So the main bridge would be probably the O2 level, quartermaster shack would be the O3 level. I would get up there and, you'd have fresh air in your face, and it was just kind of really neat. The transit was, like I say, pretty unremarkable. Pretty much on arrival in Honolulu and Pearl Harbor, my NEC kicked in. It turned out that the Wallace L. Lind 703 needed a crypto repair ET, and they were about to deploy. So I got switched. And they had a couple of months before they were to pull out. So they put me in 3M school, Maintenance Material Management School, and on Fort Island. And so I spent 6 weeks there, and I learned all about the 3M system. The 3M system in the Navy was important because Junior officers get to be senior officers by getting good commendations and so on and so forth. One of the ways they do that is to get E's. E is actually painted on the side of the ship, and it's for efficiency. So if your department is seen as being efficient in your squadron or whatever group you're in, you get an E, and that happens a couple of times a year. So if you're not actually fighting other people, the way you get assigned an E is how good your paperwork is. If you keep turning in reports that have to be corrected, you get docked points. Also, if your equipment is functional 100% of the time or 99% of the time, you get a higher grade than somebody whose equipment is only, say, 80% efficient. Okay? So, and obviously, if you can find your repair parts and get things fixed quickly, you're going to be more efficient. So, having gone to that school, that was essentially the only thing I did while I was on the Wallace L. Lynn. I never actually did anything directly related to electronics. After the school, I got back on the ship, and within 2 weeks, found out that the Wallace L. Lynn had a bad boiler, and so was not going to be going to Vietnam anytime soon. When I got done with the school, went back aboard the ship, I found out almost immediately that the Wallace L. Lynn had a bad boiler and they weren't going anywhere. So within 2 weeks of when I went back, I got assigned to the USS Epperson. The Epperson was DD 719. I got assigned to the USS Epperson. The Epperson was DD 719. And essentially I spent the last 3 years of my duty on the Epperson. We deployed like within 2 weeks of when I went on board. And like I say, I spent the last 3 years on the Epperson. On the Epperson, as far as my duties, by this time I was second class ET. I was pretty senior on the ship. For a really short time I was actually the leading ET, but then we got a more senior second class who came aboard. He became the leading ET, and off and on we had first class, and they would be the leading ET. There were a couple of times when we were at sea, after I had deployed to a ship, where underway there would be some kind of maintenance that would have to be performed on one of the radars. And so I always volunteered for that because it was just kind of neat. Scared the daylights out of me going up that high. And of course you're up there and the ship is just kind of rolling back and forth. It was exhilarating. So, and pretty much everybody on the ship was looking up like, what's that nut doing? More often than not, there'd be like two of us. We'd have like a safety belt. Once we got up there, we'd hook on and then do whatever we were up there to do. You had to go to the boiler spaces and get them to not clear their tubes so that they wouldn't discharge a lot of soot while we were up there. We had to go to the radar transmitter room and lock off the air search and surface search radars. We would go to the radio transmitter room, and they would not be allowed to transmit anything while we were up on the mast. And then up we would go, do whatever we were there to do, and then come back down. So it was just kind of neat. We did 3 Westpacks. Saw most of the sites in Asia. Went to Japan a few times. Taiwan. Spent a lot of time in Subic. Stopped in Guam a couple of times, Midway a couple of times. Got to go to Thailand. Spent a couple of days in Singapore. there were a couple of things that happened while I was on board the Epperson that were not directly related to being an ET. One of them was that because of the 3M school, people found out that I actually knew how to use the microfiche. Microfiche was a precursor to computers, and what they had is they had all the equipment on these little sheets, and the sheet would be put into a reader, and you could maneuver the reader so that you'd find what you were looking for somewhere on that sheet. Well, all of the equipment that was on board ship, the locations were on this microfiche, and I knew how to use it. So, say a hull technician, which at the time were ship fitters and DCmen, damage control repairmen, they all became hull technicians later on. They were good at what they did, but paperwork was not their forte. And certainly finding repair parts was not their forte. So the engineering officer found out about me through the EMO, and so he would have me help out the hull technicians finding the repair parts, and the machinist mates, boiler technicians, and DC men all had maintenance paperwork to do. When you perform maintenance, you had a report to fill out. And they wanted to make absolutely sure that this report was filled out right. So they would actually have me sit down and teach these guys how to fill out the report. And you know, in retrospect, it seems pretty simple, but it was very important to them. So not only did it allow me to be even more useful aboard ship, but it also allowed me to, if I wanted to hide, I could always go into an engineering space. On the ship, the main deck, all the operations people are above main deck, weapons and operation, and all the engineers are below deck. When they're looking for me, I'm in operations department, they only pass the 1MC in the operations spaces. So if I'm in an engineering space, they can't find me. They'll pass the word for me, and I might as well be on shore somewhere. So I could hide when I wanted to. Not that I did that a lot, but if I wanted to, you know, I'd just go down and chat with the hull technicians for a while. I actually at one point spent a week aboard the USS Enterprise. I had a wound that kicked up while we were in Subic Bay. I got sent to the hospital. Basically, I got sent to the infirmary, which is right there on the, almost on the pier. Unbeknownst to the ship, I got transferred to the hospital. They had sent my service record to the infirmary, but when my service record got there, I was no longer there. So they didn't know what to do with it, so they just held it. Meanwhile, I'm in the hospital, and my ship pulls out. There was a typhoon, and the ship pulled out, and then from there went off to whatever duty they were going to. And so, like a month later, I'm ready to be discharged from the hospital, but I don't have a service record. My ship's not in port. I'm kind of persona non grata. I'm just there. And they won't pay me because I don't have a service record. So I decided that the best thing for me was to figure out a way to get back to my ship. So I talked to a couple of people, and one guy said, this officer that I ran into said, "Oh, your ship's out doing plane guard in I Corps," which is the northern part of Vietnam. It turns out that the Enterprise, which is now in Singapore, is going to be up there like within a week. If you can get to the Enterprise, they can drop you off to your ship. I'm like, okay, how do I do that? Well, their air arm was in QB Point in the Philippines. He said if you can get out there, you can probably get on a plane that'll take you to Singapore, get on the Enterprise, and then they'll transfer you. I'm like, okay. So I go out to where the planes are, and I'm asking this officer, the duty officer for the day, for permission to get on the plane. And he's like, who told you about the plane? I'm like, well, you know, a little birdie told me. So I had to explain to him how I got the information in the first place. He said, look, you go talk to this chief. He gave me a name. And if he can put you on the plane, we'll take you to Singapore. So he put me on the plane. I flew to Singapore. So we pull into Singapore, and I'm in dungarees because that's all I had when I left the ship. No service record. I did have a message from a teletype message from my ship, which basically said, get back any way you can, have a nice day. So when I went on board the ship, USS Enterprise, first of all, I'm not in a dress uniform, so the officer of the day, on a destroyer, the officer of the day is like lieutenant, junior grade, or an ensign. On an aircraft carrier, it's a full commander or a captain. So I'm looking at this full commander who would have been the captain on the destroyer. And he's like, who are you and what are you doing here and where the hell's your uniform? I'm like, well, I pull out my little piece of paper. I did have my ID at least, you know, I had my wallet with me. Gave him that whole story, and he's like, whatever. So they put me in the transit barracks on the ship, and I didn't have access to any of the controlled spaces, which as an ET I would, but since I didn't have a service record, I don't have a clearance. So I didn't know where I was specifically on the ship until the next morning. It's probably 5:30 in the morning. I'm pretty much fast asleep. I kind of hear this little whiny sound. And then boom! Like a truck crashed into, all right? It turns out that I'm under wire number 3 and they're recovering aircraft. After that, when I heard the little whine, I knew what to expect. But the first time it was jolting. So anyway, after a couple of days, we went out to sea. We headed toward I-Corps. It turns out that the Epperson was not going to be operating with the Enterprise per se. In other words, we wouldn't be doing plane guard for them. We were doing what was called NGFS, which is Naval Gunfire Support. You sit about 3 miles off the coast and lob shells into wherever they tell you to lob shells, 5-inch shells. So I begged this guy, one of the ETs, he got me into CIC, which is the Combat Information Center. They took me over to the ops officer, tried to explain to him who I was and why I was there. Basically had to go through the whole story again, and he showed him my little message, which by now was kind of tattered, but at any rate, he goes, well, he says, we're going to be doing a holy helo tomorrow, maybe I could get you on that. I'm like, okay, that would be nice, but for now, you got to get out of here, you know, and don't tell anybody we talked, okay? So the next morning, I go and find my ET friend, and he checks, and they put me down on the flight deck. Off to one side, I'm not actually out on the flight deck, but basically where all the mailbags were. And sure enough, they come to get the mailbags, and they go, "Come on, you're going too." Put me on a helicopter. Took me out. They were pretty much at the end of their run. They have not seen the Epperson yet. I was like begging him to, you know, maybe you could look around a little more. Maybe they're over there. And then the co-pilot goes, "Hey, what about that?" And sure enough, it was my ship. So they radioed my ship. They told people on the ship that they had an important package. They really weren't allowed to say what they were doing specifically. So they went over the ship, put a harness on me, and dropped me down. And I actually got a picture going down, because kind of heavy, and the cable was kind of unwinding. So I had to kind of time it 1, 2, and then the third time around I took the picture. And it's basically of all these people on the back part of the ship looking up at, that's our important package? So I got back aboard my ship. It was kind of interesting, the Enterprise, in that it was kind of like a destroyer being a small town and the Enterprise being a city. It just was really different. It gave me an appreciation for being on a destroyer. I was more comfortable with that. While I was on board, the ship actually was awarded 4 E's. Engineering got 1, weapons got 1, operations got 2. So it really helped me with people that saw me as not military enough, but I was really useful. So the other thing happened on a destroyer when you're out at sea, particularly if you're doing NGFS, but also if you're doing plane guard, you run out of gas, you maybe run out of shells, you run out of food. So they have what they call underway replenishment, or UNREPs. And an UNREP, there's a supply ship going along at, say, 12 knots, and you pull up to them, also going a little more than 12 knots until you're next to them, and then you match each other. And if you can imagine 2 very large ships pretty close together going 12 knots, nobody wants to make a mistake, and they don't want to be there any longer than they have to. They throw lines over, they pass over a hose so that you can refuel, and they pass over pallets of food, weapons, whatever. So I'm a 2nd class ET, so I don't actually have to do this. A 3rd class might get assigned to the working party to unload the pallets. The deck that they put the pallets on only held 7 pallets at a time. So if you didn't clear the pallets faster than they could get them back and forth, they'd have to wait while you were unloading the pallets. Well, I saw this, and I went up and I started helping one group who had a couple of operations people in their group. And basically what we did is we staged it. In other words, if there were like powder, okay, there'd be like 30 of them on a pallet. And so we would put them in a passageway, okay, and we'd have 2 guys that were taking them from the passageway wherever they were supposed to go. But rather than have the pallet on the deck, we would unload the pallet really quickly, throw the pallet over the side. There's a lot of unused pallets in the South China Sea. And then they could get another one over. And we were able to do that fast enough to where there was no backlog. They could just keep bringing stuff over. And so this radioman chief, who didn't like me, can't imagine why, he knew that I didn't belong there. And the XO, the executive officer of the ship, is actually standing up on the deck where the bridge is, but he's watching the UNREP, and he's seeing what I'm doing. So this chief goes up there, and he complains to the XO that I don't belong there. He needs, he wants to order me, and the XO says, leave him alone. So afterwards, because the chief had told me that I don't belong there, and I was like, hey, I'm here, I'm doing whatever. So he brought me into the XO, and he said, I gave him an order, blah, blah, blah. And the XO goes, Chief, I'll take care of it. you're dismissed. Chief goes off, and the XO basically said, thank you for your service. As far as I'm concerned, anytime we unrep, I want you on that deck. And for the rest of the time, basically the last of the 3 Westpac cruises, I was on the deck during every unrep, being basically the deck boss. Even though that's a weapons thing, not an ops thing. He liked what I was doing. We were able to create a kind of a team approach, and we were high-fiving each other, and just it was like esprit de corps kind of thing. And the fact that we could do it, and our ship's captain would get kudos from the supply ship captain for making it fast, because like I said, they didn't want to have to be like that any longer than they had to. And so we were, kind of setting records for getting in and out, basically as long as it took to refuel. And as soon as the fuel line went, we were gone. So one day when I was up in the quartermaster shack, we're on the edge of a typhoon, and I had a camera with me. So I took a series of 3 pictures of us going into the typhoon. And the first picture, you can see the front of the ship and Mount 51, The second picture, you see the water coming up over the front of the ship, the spray. And on the third picture, you can't see Mount 51. So I really enjoyed, just being up there in a space that I really didn't belong. Kind of a joy of the day. Kind of like a roller coaster, and it would kind of like fishtail and then doink down in. And of course when it doinked, the water would come up. So I got some spray even up on the 03 or 04 level, whatever it was. I was up there, and you can see that from the pictures that I'm looking down at the forecastle and Mount 51. South China Sea, probably somewhere between Vietnam and the Philippines. So I've always had a problem with motion sickness. So typically the first day out, I wouldn't eat much of anything. But then after that, I'd be fine. It was just a matter of getting used to the, the floor moving. As far as what they were serving, it was normal stuff. Okay, like I say, I just didn't go out of my way to eat a lot of it that first day. And once I got used to being at sea, didn't make any difference to me whether it was calm or stormy or whatever. I just, it comes down to faith. I had faith that the guy steering the ship knew what he was doing. And so I didn't worry about it. It's kind of like now when you get on a plane. I figure, hopefully the guy knows what he's doing, and if he doesn't, I'm not going to have to worry about it anyway. So, like I say, 3 Westpacs, was discharged upon arrival in Honolulu, in Pearl Harbor, after the 3rd Westpac. In the interim, I had a daughter born at Tripler Army General Hospital in Hawaii. So I did manage to acquire a pineapple baby during the course of that.